So I've been smoking longer than cannabis has been legal in Canada. So I started younger than I probably should have in high school, and when I first started, it was purely recreational. I was just smoking with my friends to have fun. I was never very much of a drinker. Still am not much of a drinker, so that's where it started with me as kind of my way of relaxing and unwinding, the same way someone would drink a beer at the end of the day or go out with their friends for a drink at the bar. Me and my friends would normally go out and we would smoke weed. So when legalization happened in 2018, it was huge for me. Immediately, I knew I wanted to work in the industry. And I was just super excited that cannabis was finally available and that we could have this conversation without me admitting really to breaking the law currently. But the cool thing for me is that I'm diagnosed as bipolar. So I got that diagnosis at 18. And through my journey with cannabis, from the recreational days of being in high school and smoking to where I'm at now, I've been able to find the balance where I can get medicinal benefits from it as well as recreational benefits from it. The way that works for me is I never let myself smoke I never justify my smoking because of my mental health. I never say, I'm bipolar, so I need to smoke weed. I always approach weed as if I'm smoking it recreationally, and that way I don't smoke too much, and I'm able to get the medicinal benefits. So for me, the medicinal benefits are just a little bit about how bipolar works, and how bipolar works for me is that every person is going to cycle, and that's normal. You'll have good days and you'll have bad days. For me, because of my mental health, my good days can feel really good and my bad days can feel really bad. So the swings are a lot bigger, and cannabis helps me stay in the middle. I never get too high, I never get too low, and it helps me stay very even keel. And so that's kind of how my relationship with cannabis has changed over the last, I would say, I'm turning 30 this year, so over the last about 12, 15 years or so, has been really finding that balance between, all right, I'm going out with the boys tonight, and I'm going to bring a couple of joints for us to smoke, and just smoking to stay at that even keel, to stay in the middle. So that's just one of the things that cannabis can do outside of the recreational world, and how it applies to me specifically. When I'm not smoking it recreationally, I get that really even balance that is hard for me to achieve.
But even better than before, right? Even right now, you don't use cannabis, even better than you're 18 years old. Not like this. It's like this.
Yes,
right?
yeah. And I think part of that is, so I always say that if I smoke too much cannabis, the medicinal effects start to go away. So if I'm just smoking every free second of every free day, that's when I find that it starts to push me too far down. But yeah, now compared to when I was 18 and I wasn't A, using cannabis the right way, and B, hadn't done some of the background work. So cannabis is part of my solution, but it's not all of my solution. I still have a prescription medication that I take that's prescribed by my doctor, and I still go to therapy once a month. But yeah, when I was 18, the cycles were huge. They were really, really bad, and also they were fast. So I could have one day where I'm really, really high, and then by the next morning, I'll be really, really low. Since I've been able to factor cannabis and my medication into a kind of one complete plan for myself, my swings are, yeah, like really, really healthy compared to what they had been in the past. And then like just the tangible ways that show up in my life, like I can get up and go to work every day. That's something I really struggled with before I found what works for me and the mix of cannabis and my prescription medication. I can honor my commitments a whole lot better, whether that be work, whether that be this interview, whether that be showing up for my wife when she needs me. I find that I'm a lot more present when I'm stable, right? And that's really important for me.
How do you know cannabis can work on the bipolar?
Personal experience, purely.
You just found it? You didn't research or get advice from a doctor or what?
Not at first. Yeah, not at first. It was, for me, like I said, I was smoking recreationally, and I started noticing that when I smoked recreationally, my bipolar symptoms were better managed. And then the hard part from there, where I did need to do the research and consult with doctors, was finding the right amount of cannabis and finding the right type of cannabis. So there's 3 kind of general classifications that we use to group cannabis together. Just like with the alcohol industry, the way you can go into the beer store and pick between 100 different beers, you can come into a cannabis dispensary and you can pick between 100 different strains. So those 3 classifications are indica, sativa, and then hybrid in the middle. So indica is generalized as a more relaxed, kind of sleepy, we call it Indicouch because it's good for like sitting down and watching a movie and not kind of going too fast. And then sativa is on the other side of the spectrum. It's a bit more energetic, creative, focused high. And then hybrids can kind of be a mix of the two, and they lean one way or the other. So a big part of it for me was realizing that the indica is what really helps me. The sativa really bothers my anxiety. So I don't smoke sativa at all anymore, because when I do, I just feel like my heart's racing, I'm sweating bullets, and I get super anxious. Whereas with the indica, it does what I need. It slows me down a little bit, it calms me out a little bit, it helps with the anxiety, it helps me get to sleep at the end of the night. So when I was smoking recreationally, I didn't understand how those 3 groups of cannabis worked, and I was kind of smoking whatever I could get my hands on. So that's partly because it wasn't legal yet, and we didn't have the access to it that we do now, but it was also partly because I was misinformed. Had we had a dispensary back then for me to walk into and ask these questions, I probably could have saved a lot of time and pain. Had someone like myself been able to walk me through what it was that I may or may not need. But because it wasn't legal, I had a heck of a time just kind of experimenting with my own personal supply to see what worked and what didn't. And I also had a heck of a time finding a doctor who was willing to have the conversation with me. A lot of my doctors would just immediately say, nope, you're smoking, it's a drug, it's illegal. Even now that it's legal, they don't love it. And they weren't willing to accept it as something that was helping me with my mental health. So when I finally found a doctor who was willing to say, hey, if cannabis helps you, I'm open to it. Let's just discuss how much you need, what kind you need, the best way for you to take it. That really helped me focus in the plan so that I could use the cannabis to target the bipolar. So now how that looks in my current life compared to how I used it when I was 18, when I go to a dispensary now, I know I'm looking for an indica. I know that I like it between 25 and 28% THC. And because of legalization, bud tenders can very quickly and very easily point me in the direction of what options they have that fit that flower. Whereas before legalization, you were subject to whatever the person you were buying from had on hand, right? Most of the time, they didn't know what it was, whether it was indica, sativa, what strain, what strength. So you just got whatever was in the bag, and once you smoked it, you knew whether it was the right stuff or not. So yeah, now I have a much more targeted approach to the way that I buy cannabis, and that changes too. So if I'm buying something that I know is going to be more of a daily smoke for me, that's going to be more for my mental health. And so I'm going to aim for that targeted indica 25, 28% specific product with certain qualifications. And then when I'm smoking recreationally, it's more, what do I want to try tonight? What kind of new thing do I want to try? And then my restrictions on what I'm buying kind of ease up a bit, and I can pick what I'm happy with. But yeah, the big changes over the last 10 years, I would say, is that I know better what the cannabis is doing to help me, and because of that, I know better what to buy when I'm at the store, so that I know I'm getting what I need every single time that I'm shopping.
Yeah, that surprised me, the knowledge. And this is the first time I heard this kind of 3 group. Yeah, please give me more knowledge. Yeah.
100%. So the cool thing about this is that the indica hybrid sativa groupings are all a bit old school. So those are terms that we actually used pre-legalization to kind of generally describe a more sleepy type of cannabis or a more energetic type of cannabis. And since 2018, when we legalized and all these big research companies are researching it, we've actually been able to isolate the part of cannabis that is responsible for the differences in effect from strain to strain. And surprisingly enough, it's not THC. So Just to back up a little bit, THC is the psychoactive component in cannabis. When you smoke cannabis, that's the part of it that you're consuming that is getting you high. The way it works is it actually goes into your bloodstream, into your brain, and bonds with your CB1 receptor, which is part of the endocannabinoid system. So every human has an endocannabinoid system, and there are two receptors in there, CB1 and CB2. THC specifically bonds with CB1, and that's what gets you intoxicated. Other cannabinoids like CBD, CBG, and the secondary ones, they'll bond with CB2, and that's why CBD specifically is non-intoxicating, because it's actually interacting with a different part of that same endocannabinoid system within the body. So with that, we know it's not doing anything different from strain to strain. Whether you're smoking a sativa or an indica, whether you're smoking 15% or 25%, the THC is always going to enter your bloodstream and go straight to your brain and bond with your CB1 receptor. The part that will actually alter the effect of the cannabis is the terpenes. So terpenes are a secondary compound, and they're actually present in all plants and fruits and vegetables, and it's what you smell. So when you smell a rose, you are smelling the specific terpene profile that a rose has. Same thing applies to cannabis. When you open up a bag of cannabis and you get hit with that big skunky smell, you're actually smelling the terpenes that are present in that flower. And there are hundreds of different terpenes that can be in any type of plant. So we still don't have a complete knowledge of how the terpenes work and how many terpenes there are, but they are the part that will result in a more indica high or a more sativa high. So we're starting to see people in the industry have a much better understanding of this, and so instead of coming in and asking for indica, hybrid, and sativa, they can say it's limonene. So I might be going too fast here. Limonene is one of the terpenes. So when you smell a lemon and you get that big citrusy whiff, you're smelling limonene. That's that citrusy smell, and it's also a very common terpene in cannabis. That's why a lot of cannabis has that strong citrusy smell, and it's been directly linked to sativa-based effects. So that's the more energetic, creative, and focused side of things, but it's also the part that makes my anxiety go crazy. So whereas before we did all this research, you could go in and say, you know what, I'm looking for an indica or a hybrid or a sativa. Now we're getting customers coming in saying, I would specifically like limonene. And that's important because limonene is not exclusive to sativa plants. There are plenty of indica strains that have limonene in them, and there are plenty of sativa strains that have limonene in them. And so what we're learning is that before legalization, we had a really incomplete knowledge of how these worked, because it is totally possible that you go to the store and buy a sativa and it makes you really sleepy. And you can also go to the store and buy an indica and it can make you really energetic, which is kind of the opposite of what those two categories are known to do. So now we're actually able to use the science to break down and analyze the cannabis and say, it's not indica plants, it's not sativa plants specifically that kind of cause those sleepier or more energetic effects. It's the terpenes. So yeah, now that we understand that cannabis is a whole lot more than just THC and how much THC is in it, again, we're more focused, we're more targeted to getting the exact product that can either help you or is going to result in you having the most fun that night or best suit whatever it is you have planned to do. And that's going to make cannabis more approachable for, I think, everybody, because it's not just about the people who want to get high. We have plenty of people in this kind of community who just want the medicinal effects, or they just want to go to sleep at the end of the night. They just want to kind of deal with the arthritis or whatever it is they might be dealing with. And beforehand, they didn't have a ton of options to target what they wanted. So now we know that terpenes are A, present in cannabis, B, we're starting to isolate what each terpene's effect within cannabis is, and now we can better label our cannabis so that we always know what we're consuming, and that's really important for safety, for effectiveness, and it's also just desired that people want to know what they're buying, they want to know what they're smoking, and they want to make sure it's going to be right for them. So that's a part of cannabis that's probably new to a lot of people because we've only kind of known about it for the last 6 or 7 years. And it's really cool. We're starting to see, whereas when cannabis legalized, when you bought a bottle of weed, you'd get a number that said how much THC was in it, and you'd get a number that said how much CBD was in it, but that was about it. Now when you buy a bag of cannabis, you'll get THC, CBD, a whole list of different terpenes that are present within the cannabis and the percentages that those are at. And yeah, that seems to be something that I think the community has really responded to, because we're starting to see those, the packages with lots of information on them, be really attractive to cannabis buyers on both sides of the ledger, whether you're a medicinal user, whether you're a recreational user, or whether you're like myself and you're getting a little bit of both out of it. There's just so much more information available to you now, so that you can best decide what it is you want to consume.
Yeah. So how do you rate cannabis addiction?
It's a tough one because I'm not a scientist. I'm a part of the community, and I'm very well educated on what cannabis research has been done already, but I'm not conducting any of the research myself. And I truly believe that when it comes to addiction, we have just scratched the surface in terms of what can or cannot be addictive about it. So more research needs to be done first and foremost. But on my side of things, the biggest difference is the physical withdrawals when you stop consuming the product. And that's the big difference between something like alcohol or cocaine or some of these harder drugs, where the physical withdrawal symptoms are so severe you can be hospitalized to deal with them, right? Like people have died from alcohol withdrawal, or people have died from heroin withdrawal. The withdrawal effects from cannabis are extremely minor, if nothing, compared to the severity of those effects. So in my personal experience, I've had periods where I smoke every day, way too much, and have gotten to the point where if I don't have cannabis, maybe personality is the wrong word, but my mood is altered negatively because I don't have the cannabis. So that is a physical withdrawal symptom, where my mood is changing because I don't have something that my body thinks it needs. However, compared to something like cigarettes, which I also smoke, it's nothing. If you asked me today to put down cannabis for the next 2 weeks, I could, if properly motivated. If you asked me today to put down cigarettes for 2 weeks, I could not, if properly motivated. And that's the biggest difference. I think that everything can be mentally addictive. I remember that show on, I think it was TLC, and it was called My Strange Addiction, and you'd meet somebody who was addicted to eating couch cushions, as crazy as that sounds. And they had mentally convinced themselves that this was something that they needed, and so their body would react to when they didn't get it, even though it was something as crazy as sofa cushions. I think that for cannabis, it's the same. You can get kind of addicted to that mental space that you're in when you smoke cannabis. You can get addicted to the routine of smoking cannabis, and that in itself can make it very hard to put cannabis down. But in terms of the physical withdrawal symptoms, you're not going to end up in the hospital because you haven't smoked weed. You might miss a couple of nights of sleep. You might be uncomfortable in your own skin for a couple of days. But most of those physical symptoms are over within the first 72 hours of you fully stopping your cannabis use. And by 2 weeks, your body should look as though you've never smoked cannabis before. And that happens in 2 ways. All those physical and mental symptoms of withdrawal and addiction are going to be gone after about 2 weeks for most people. And the other thing is that your tolerance will have lowered to the point that it's akin as if you'd never smoked before. And that's where, so tolerance is the more you smoke, the more THC you'll need to achieve the effect that you got the first time. And tolerance is achieved because your body is always trying to return you to homeostasis. And that's what your normal is, or what we'd call, I guess, sober. And the more you ask your body to regulate from an intoxicated place back down to its normal, the better it gets at doing that, and the quicker and more effectively it can process and kind of work through the THC. So you're always looking for a little bit more to get the same effect that you had last time, and there's a limit to that. To fix that, all you gotta do is stop smoking for 2 weeks and you're back at zero. And the best example I can give is I just went on vacation. I don't smoke nearly as much when I'm with my parents, and my tolerance is half of what it was when I left. So whereas before I left, about a week ago when we met, I could smoke, let's say, 3 to 5 joints in a night. I'm smoking one now, and it's lasting me the same way that those 3 to 5 smoke. Give me a couple of weeks, and I'll be back to smoking 3 or 5 because my habits will have built back up again.
Very interesting. Let me. So when you cut it to 1 joint a day, what changed with your body, with your emotion?
When I cut down to 1 joint per day, what's the best way to answer that? The effects. So the reason I cut down to a joint a day is because the effect I was getting off of 1 joint after taking that week off, more or less, was so much stronger than the effect I was getting from the exact same joint a week before I took the break. So the only real reason that I cut down to 1 was because I was getting what I needed out of the 1 joint, whereas before I left, I needed the 3 or 4 or 5 to achieve the same goal. So it wasn't about minimizing my use or anything about that or like that. It was more about maintaining that same effect throughout, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that same effect that helps me with my mental health and the bipolar disorder. And after a week of not smoking, had I smoked 3 or 4 or 5 joints, I would have been so intoxicated that we blew past any medicinal benefits into just pure la land of I'm very, very high right now. And I don't want that. I don't mind being high. I definitely enjoy it. But for more of my everyday use, I'm definitely trying to do more of the medicinal effects than the recreational effects. So that was just a personal decision. When I got home, I smoked a joint and said, okay, like that's good. I don't need any more. I think to better answer your question would be to kind of go back to the last time I quit. Because before when I first moved to Innisfil, I actually thought that cannabis was hurting my mental health, and so I gave up use completely for well over a year. No cannabis at all.
What year?
So that would have been probably 2017, going into beginning of 2017, ending somewhere in the middle of 2018 when I started smoking again. And I made that decision for myself. Giving it up was very easy. I decided I didn't want to smoke anymore and smoked the rest of what I had in the house, and then I just stopped buying it. And kind of like I said, like I couldn't do that with cigarettes. But once it was out of the house and was out of my kind of direct line of sight, it was very easy to stop using cannabis for about 18 months. And I found that I sped up. And so what I mean by that is I talk very fast. I move very quickly, and when I'm not in control of how quick I'm moving, it can get very uncomfortable for me. And that's what I noticed was kind of taking over in that year and a half. I had a harder time focusing. I had a harder time staying on task for long periods of time. I would get very hyper-focused and kind of interested in something for a very brief window, and then I would just lose interest and give it up. So that can be actually a little dangerous, because the bigger the plan, the more you can invest yourself in the plan, and if you don't actually have the follow-through, you can invest a whole lot of time and money into something and then just kind of leave it to die. So yeah, I wasn't sleeping as well. I wasn't as good an employee at the jobs that I was working because my focus was just all over the place. And it wasn't until I met my current psychiatrist and he suggested reintroducing it that I really found that even base, which is where I've been for the last 4 or 5 years now. Now what I will say is that that's probably pretty specific to me. The 2 weeks where I first gave it up are probably going to sound really relatable for anybody who's smoked a fair amount of cannabis and then quit. A little bit jittery, a little bit hard to sleep at the end of the day, even a little bit hard to eat because cannabis can be such an appetite stimulant. When you remove that, your body has a hard time feeling hungry on its own. It's used to having that crutch of cannabis to help it feel hungry. So I found I lost some weight. I lost a couple of hours of sleep on a few nights there in those first 2 weeks. But like I was saying earlier, those after those 2 weeks are up, I felt like I was back to a pretty normal space for me. But what I didn't find is that the problems I thought would go away, the problems that I thought were caused by smoking too much cannabis didn't go away when I stopped smoking cannabis. I was still very anxious. I was still depressed on the days when I was super low. I wasn't having any easier of a time getting to or from work. And a lot of the things that I thought would get better just stayed the same or even got worse. It wasn't until I found the right amount of cannabis on a weekly basis that I found my most comfortable and stable spot. And I personally found that through a little bit of help with doctors, but mainly through personal experience, trying things, smoking too much, smoking not enough, and being really honest with myself as to what I thought was helping and what I thought was hurting. So I think one of the mistakes that people get into, because cannabis can be so fun on the recreational side, people can convince themselves that they need it for a medicinal reason because they don't want to give it up. And it's a lot easier to justify a product like cannabis that has a checkered history with the law, doesn't have a lot of research on the scientific side as to what it can do for specific illnesses. It's a lot easier to justify, hey, I'm smoking this for my mental health, or I'm consuming this for even my physical health, whether it be pain management, cancer treatment, nausea. That's an easier sell to make, whether it be to yourself, to your wife, to your family, to whoever it is. Much easier, but if you're not honest with yourself about whether the cannabis is actually helping you, you can do a lot more harm than good. So the biggest thing that I would say that I was able to do successfully was say, okay, I think I'm smoking too much now, and the only way to really figure out if that's true or not is to stop smoking. And when I stopped smoking, I didn't just do it for a week, I didn't just do it for a month, I did it for a year. And I said, okay, after the year, I looked back and I said, okay, did I have an easier time getting to work? Did I have better sleep? Did I have better eating habits? Did my living habits overall look healthier after a year without cannabis than they did the year before with cannabis? And for me personally, the answer to that question was no. And I came to that answer myself between talking with my parents, who were the most common people in my life. They saw me both sober and stoned at that point, and through talking to my doctor. And through all three of those perspectives, myself, my parents, my doctor, we all kind of landed on, yeah, you're healthier when you've got a certain amount of cannabis in your life. And so I started smoking again. That's not going to be true for everybody. My fiance, for example, has played around with cannabis, and she uses it to sleep specifically. She does not get the same medicinal benefits out of being intoxicated that I do. For me, being intoxicated makes it easier to quiet all the extra noise in the world and focus on what I need to focus on. And for her, funny enough, it's the opposite. When she gets too intoxicated, all that extra noise on the outside gets really loud for her. And all of a sudden, she's focusing on tiny little things that shouldn't be stressing her out, but are driving her totally insane. And so that's just a great example of how her and I can consume the same product and just have radically different experiences with it. So for her, she takes a very, very low dose of THC every night, and that's enough to get her to sleep, but not enough to get her high. And that's what her normal is. So that's kind of my journey from figuring out how cannabis can help, how cannabis can hurt. And yeah, the hardest part is definitely being honest with yourself, saying, hey, I think I might be smoking too much, or I think that the cannabis might be hurting the thing I'm trying to fix, and giving it a shot, talking to your doctors, being willing to give it up for a few weeks, few months, whatever it is that you need, And then be really honest with yourself about why you're smoking. If you're smoking recreationally, there's nothing wrong with that. It's legal in Canada now. You're allowed to go to the store and buy weed and smoke it to have fun, and I super encourage anybody who's interested to do that. Where you're going to get into trouble is when you're convincing yourself that you're smoking for a medical reason, but really you just want to get stoned for fun. If you're smoking for If you're convincing yourself that you're smoking for a medical reason and you're not doing the rest of the work, talking to your doctors, kind of consulting with the people in your lives, you leave the risk that what you're trying to treat is actually going untreated. And that's when things can get scary. For me, with my mental health, if I'm smoking too much, the depression gets really bad. And so the reason that I use the word scary is because all of a sudden, all of the little boo-boos throughout my week feel massive, and that can be really crushing throughout a week. If I just smoked cannabis to deal with my bipolar disorder, I would be covering about 33% of the problem. Like I said, I need the cannabis, I need the prescription medication that I get through my doctor and by checking in with him on a regular basis. I also need the therapy. I have a great therapist that I go to once a month. We talk for an hour. And if I cut out any single one of those three, whether it be the cannabis, the prescription medication, or the therapist, I would suffer for it. My illness would not be getting treated the way it's properly getting treated. So it's really important to be honest with yourself, to be honest with your support groups and with your doctors about what cannabis is successfully doing for you, what it might not be doing for you. And the focus, if you're using it medicinally, needs to be at its core, treat the issue, whether that means using cannabis or not using cannabis, or in my case, using cannabis as part of kind of a group of things to manage your illness. You can't make it about smoking the cannabis. You have to make it about treating the illness. And if smoking cannabis is part of what helps or something that helps, fantastic. But that's part of the divide that we're seeing from pre-legalization to legalization. And I think the biggest reason for that is every day, more and more people are comfortable saying, I smoke weed because I like smoking weed. I smoke it recreationally. They don't need the excuse anymore of having a medical card or having something out of their control that they're treating with the cannabis. It can just be that you like smoking. And I think that is really good for the medicinal customers to be able to say, maybe what you're using cannabis to treat isn't getting fully looked after, and maybe you should go talk to your doctor and see if there's something else. Because for the longest time, I think the biggest fear was you went and talked to your doctor about it, and they'd say, okay, stop smoking the weed. And a lot of people don't want to. They are either enjoying it recreationally or it is helping at least a little bit, and they don't want to give it up. So now that people can realize that, hey, I don't have to stop smoking if I don't want to. I can continue, or even if you don't smoke, I don't have to stop enjoying cannabis if I don't want to. But I can also loop my doctor in and my support group in and kind of get a broader opinion on whether or not I'm actually succeeding at treating my illness, or whether or not I'm leaving something unchecked. So I think that's super important.
So from 2018 to now, we already have 6 years legalized.
Yep.
What do you think, as your own opinion, what do you think cannabis legalized helped as a community? Well, what part you think is getting worse?
First and foremost, it's safer. Buying cannabis before legalization was very, the word I want to use is sketchy, but it's not super professional. It just wasn't, it wasn't safe. You were buying from people, buying a product that you intended to consume and put into your body from, most of the time, a person you didn't know. You didn't know where the product came from or where it was grown, how it was handled, or even that it was weed. That's kind of the dangers of a black market, is that there's no regulation, there's no testing being done, and the same kind of negative business concepts that do apply to legal businesses, namely cutting costs, everybody loves to cut costs, aren't are being applied by the black market dealers. And when black market dealers that have no regulations or anybody to answer to start cutting costs, they can do something, whether it be intentionally or non-intentionally, that makes the product very dangerous. At the same time, because it's an illegal product, the groups of people who... It's just as likely that you're buying from a very good person who's like a friendly neighbor as it is that you're buying from somebody with a checkered criminal history. None of this is ideal for the average medicinal or even recreational shopper. So now that we've legalized, you're going to a store that's regulated by the government, whether you like the government or not. They have done a very good job of putting rules in place with an effort to make the product safer without removing the parts of cannabis that we really like. They haven't put any limits on smokable THC, so that people like myself, my friends, and the people that I normally hang out with, we can still get that really strong effect. But they have put limits on THC that can be accessible to children. They have put regulations on what pesticides can be used in protecting your grow, and just really focused on making sure that every time someone walks into a legal dispensary, they're getting like a safe and friendly customer service, but they're also getting a safe and tested and guaranteed product that they can count on consistently every single time. Before legalization, the way that I was shopping, a lot of the time you were meeting someone you didn't know, handing them a certain amount of money, and they handed you a Ziploc bag, and you had to either be very knowledgeable, which was hard to do without all the research back then, so that you knew how to look at your weed and make sure, like, all right, that looks right at least. Or like getting something and saying, I don't know what they sprinkled on that, or you didn't have that extra layer of insulation that the government provided. You were 100% responsible for advocating for yourself and your own safety. So that's the first thing that legalizing cannabis has done. It's safer, 100%, from both what you're consuming and from how you're getting it. Those two things have definitely been improved. Here we are now, like you said, 6 years later, and what we're starting to see now that the industry is very safe is a focus on improving the product. Before this, without legalization, we weren't able to research, we weren't able to figure out things like how THC worked in the brain or how terpenes affect a certain effect. And now that the people who are growing these products and making these products are armed with all this information, the quality of product has jumped through the roof almost overnight. The best example I can make is the first year that cannabis was legalized. I think the average cost of cannabis per gram was $9. You could probably Google an official statistic, but it was probably sitting between about $8 and $10 per gram as an average cost. I remember that a lot of the mid-grade products on dispensary shelves at the time were around $45 or $50 for 3.5 grams, which is a lot. That's very high, and that's what most top shelf premium options cost nowadays, 6 years later. And then also, like, just as a broad, general kind of illustration of quality, a lot of those products were topping out around 24 or 25% THC. 6 years later, the average cost of cannabis is down somewhere between $3.50 and $4 per gram. Most of those comparable 3.5s that would have been $45 6 years ago, those products are maybe $18 to $24 now for the same amount of cannabis at the same quality. And most of those cheap options are probably a little better than what you were buying 6 years ago for $45 or $50. Nowadays, I can't remember the last time I saw a 3.5 gram jar for more than $48, for $50 plus tax, and that's the best stuff that's available at this point. And then just as kind of like a personal review on cannabis, what you were buying for $45 6 years ago was junky. It was not good stuff. It was dry. It didn't taste good. It was weak. It was expensive. Not great. Nowadays, we're seeing the stuff that's $18, $24 for the same amount just be really, really good. It's fresh. It's big, nice buds to look at. Nice buds to grind up. It smokes nice. It tastes nice. It hits nice. So these are all things that people should be excited about. The cost of cannabis is going down, the quality is going up, and the safety is getting improved, I think, year after year. There's definitely places where the government can still improve. There's some laws that they can relax. There's some laws they really need to tighten up. But But so far, I think that the only thing we can say about the legal cannabis industry is that it's been a huge success. The black market is dying. The government and the people that are running these businesses are starting to make a lot of money doing these sales. And I think that also, like as a consumer, I can afford to smoke the way that I'd like to because I'm paying a reasonable price now. But also, kind of like I was saying at the beginning, I can really target that money and that to get the products that I need, either to enjoy myself the most recreationally or to do the best job of managing personally my mental health.
Okay. I also interviews people right now using hard drugs. User, the accusing cannabis is the open door to harder drugs. What do you think about that?
I don't believe it. I think that if you're interested in doing harder drugs, you're going to do harder drugs. But I don't think that cannabis provides any more of a gateway to those harder drugs than things that have been legal for so long. I think cigarettes can do the exact same thing. I think that alcohol can do the exact same thing. Really, anything that alters your state of sobriety or consciousness, however you want to describe it, I think can show somebody that there are more options than just sober out there. For me personally, I've experimented with things that are currently still illegal. That was more my university phase, and it became very apparent to me very quickly that I did not like doing drugs. I like to smoke weed. That's it. Almost everything that I tried, whether it be shrooms, whether it be LSD, whether it be MDMA, were not for me. Cannabis didn't provide my gateway to those drugs. I wanted to try those drugs for my own reasons, kind of independent to cannabis. And really what cannabis showed me was that I don't like those things. I much prefer to smoke a joint and just calm down. So I'd actually say that cannabis was probably the opposite of a gateway drug for me. It pulled me out of that hard drug world and said, well, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether cannabis is or is not a hard drug. But it showed me that I didn't like that and that I was pretty comfortable with my smoking habits, and really that was what I wanted. I didn't want, the crazy hard drug highs that I was getting from my experimental phase. I also don't think that if I had never smoked weed that I wouldn't have done that. I started drinking around 17 years old. I didn't ever really like drinking. The hangover was always too extreme for me to make the night before worth it. And had I not found cannabis, I probably would have started experimenting with hard drugs much earlier than I did, because I wanted a way to take part in the same activities that all of my friends were at that age. And at that age, a lot of us were drinking and partying and kind of learning what that side of life has to offer as we enter adulthood. And especially because alcohol wasn't something that I enjoyed. I think that that's what would have pushed me towards, like, hey, this guy's got MDMA tonight, let's try that instead of drinking. Or this guy's got insert hard drug, let's try that tonight. Having something that I knew I liked in cannabis was what allowed me to say no a lot of those nights. Like, hey man, nah, I got a joint. I don't think I need that, but you do you. So yeah, I don't personally believe it as a gateway drug. I'd be super curious to see the science behind whether or not it's a gateway drug or not. But yeah, no is definitely my answer on that.
Nice. So what is the advice for whoever never used cannabis the first time used? What kind of advice you give them?
First and foremost, less is more. Like you can always take more, you can't take less. I think a lot of the people that I've seen use cannabis for the first time normally don't enjoy it because they overdo it. The difference between a low dose and a high dose can be pretty extreme with cannabis, the same way it can be with alcohol, like what's one beer versus a full 2-4. I think the difference is that with alcohol, you have a better idea as to how much you're consuming because you're actually consuming like a physical product. If you drink, 6-7 beers, you're going to feel it in your stomach. You're going to feel pretty full, a little bloated, if anything, whereas you don't get that with cannabis. And so you can get yourself into the deep end very quickly without kind of knowing that you've had too much. So first-time users, go low, go slow. If you're not feeling it the way you want to, you can always add more. But once you've smoked that massive 2-gram blunt with your best friend, you're in for it whether you want to be or not. So that would be my first piece of advice. Secondly, make use of your local legal dispensary. So many of these places have incredibly educated, borderline, if not qualified cannabis experts working at these stores. And a good dispensary is not going to prioritize recreational smoking or kind of that old school mentality of sales the way we did before black market or during black market days and before legalization. A good dispensary is going to take a broader approach and focus on customer service. And customer service starts with identifying exactly what each specific customer needs and fitting a product to what they need. So go to your local dispensary, find someone that you trust there or feel comfortable with there, and then just be super honest with them. Tell them what your experience is like. Tell them what you plan on doing. Tell them what you're hoping to get out of it, and ask for their opinion as to what they think the best product is. It's going to change for every person, given whatever their past experience might be or what they're specifically trying to achieve with their smoking habits. And that's what makes a good bud tender a good bud tender, is their ability to kind of fit each product to each customer. But yeah, my best advice is to just take advantage of your local cannabis experts. There are dispensaries, it feels like, on every corner next to every Tim's at this point. And while every bud tender won't be a good bud tender, a lot of them are out there really trying to educate the community and grow the community so that it can be not just approachable for the person who wants to get as high as possible and smoke the most and kind of carry the old days of cannabis with them into the future. It needs to be just as approachable for that guy as it is for the elderly person who's coming in and wants help with their arthritis or wants help sleeping, or even just says, hey, now that it's legal, I never tried this growing up, or I never kind of had an experience with this at any point and I'd like to. We need to be able to make sure that each one of those people is getting the exact product that they need, and it will differ. Like if you're coming in and you just want help going to sleep, then it might not be a THC product that you need. It might be CBD or CBN, which is non-intoxicating, which can be a lot more comfortable for someone. Whereas, yeah, if you're coming in because you feel like you missed out on something in high school and you want to kind of bring it back in time and smoke your first joint, then yeah, there's definitely a product out there that will fit each of them. So yeah, just be honest. Tell your bud tenders what you're looking for, and yeah, hopefully they can find something. I believe in their ability to find something that will fit each customer, 100%.
Yeah. So right now, all the products is all in package, or they also can weight by individual flowers?
All prepackaged, yeah. So that's a law within the legal industry in Ontario, and I think broader, I think that applies to all of Canada. So yeah, everything that's ordered into a legal dispensary in Ontario will come prepackaged. The bud tender or store that you're shopping from will have had no hand in growing, packaging, or any of that thing on that side of the product. Their whole job is to sell that product. Which is probably a problem within the industry. I think that customers would enjoy having less people into the industry. So what I mean by that is, if you buy a product from a local dispensary and it's moldy, your problem isn't actually with the dispensary that you bought it from, it's with the company that grew that product, but you've never actually associated with that company. So if you'd like to return it, you're trying to reach a company that you've never spoken with, you've never shopped from, you shopped from a dispensary and the product was moldy, and the dispensary is simply operating as a middleman. So it can get a bit confusing. I think a lot of people would prefer if at their local dispensary the bud tenders were just kind of weighing out and providing the product that way. But that would remove a lot of safety from the industry. The fact that everything is prepackaged allows it to go through all of the government testing regulations, and it also ensures that the product from the time it's tested and regulated is not altered with. So yeah, it ensures that the product that shows up in the store has not been altered with. The example I can make for that is, if you're receiving an order at a dispensary and you open up a box of product and it's the cannabis has already been opened, the product is immediately not available for sale. That'd be a damaged or defective product that got returned. So the fact that everything is prepackaged gives us a level of guarantee that it went through the testing, it has been approved by all of the health and safety regulations that are required of it. And since that testing has done, the product has not been handled or changed at all. And you're getting exactly what you know you're buying. So as nice as it would be for us to be able to just kind of scale out cannabis and sell it to the customers, I don't think that that's something you'll ever see in the industry. I think it'll always be prepackaged.
Very beautiful. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
For
no worries. Yeah, anytime.
yeah.